Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Mama Uju was only 33 when the heavens broke over her life like shattered glass. Her husband Nanso, a commercial bus driver known for his cheerful banter and calloused hands, died in a tragic accident on his way to Onitsha. The knock on her door that morning brought her to her knees, not because she hadn't feared it. She always did each time he left for the road, but because nothing truly prepares a woman for that moment when the last tie to hope is severed. Left with two sons, Chidi, aged 7, and Samto, aged 5, Mama Uju felt like the sky had collapsed, leaving only smoke and silence. The burial was modest. The village offered sympathies, but sympathy could not pay rent or fill empty stomachs. As soon as the mourners left, she sat alone on the floor of her one-room mud house, staring at her children's sleeping faces by candlelight, whispering over and over again, "I must not fail you." The days that followed were cruel, unforgiving, and raw. The bills her husband left behind were more than a widow could bear. Landlords came knocking. Neighbors avoided eye contact. The little she had was soon gone. But Mama Uju was not the type to beg. With the last 2,000 Nigerian nairas she bought a basin, a bag of flour, and a few wraps of yeast. By the next morning, she was frying akara by the dusty roadside, under a makeshift wooden umbrella fashioned with tarpaulin and bamboo. From dawn until midday, she served workers and school children. Her hands, once smooth, turned coarse. Her voice grew hoarse from shouting prices and haggling. Yet, she smiled every evening when she returned home to her sons. She would sit them down on her lap, hug them tight, and tell them stories of kings who rose from nothing, because in her mind, her boys were destined for something greater. Despite the leaks in the roof and the rats in the kitchen, her heart burned with determination. She enrolled Chidi and Samto in the local government primary school, patched their torn uniforms with precision, and made sure they never miss a day. On some nights after selling akara, she would help neighbors sweep compounds or fetch water just to afford pencils and notebooks. Her entire existence revolved around her boys. And though her bones ached and her back felt older than her age, she never once complained aloud. Her dreams were not for herself anymore. They were planted deep in the soil of her son's future, watered daily with tears, toil, and unwavering love. To the world, she was just another poor widow trying to survive. But to Chidi and Samto, she was all they had, their mother, father, protector, and provider wrapped in one trembling, unbreakable body. As Chidi and Samto grew into their teenage years, the streets began to whisper their names, and not in praise. At first, it was small things, a missing pen here, a stolen mango there. But soon, the boys began skipping school, gambling behind the classrooms with other troubled youths, and pocketing things from local shops. The same community that once pitted Mama Uju now scoffed at her, muttering that she had failed to train her sons. She would receive knocks at midnight, angry neighbors demanding compensation for stolen items. Her voice would tremble as she apologized, begging for time to repay. More often than not, she would sell her personal wrapper or borrow money just to cover their shame. Despite the humiliation, she never beat her boys harshly. Instead, she cried deep, silent sobs into her pillow at night, praying fervently that her sons would change. There were moments when it seemed like things would turn around. The boys would return after being caught in a scandal, their eyes filled with fake remorse and solemn promises to do better. They would hug her and cry, telling her they didn't want to see her suffer. Mama Uju, ever the believer, would hug them tightly, her thin arms wrapped around their growing frames, and whisper, "God will help us. My joy will still come." She clung to those moments as evidence that there was still hope. But the very next week, they'd disappear again, only to be found at the local viewing center, betting on football matches with money they couldn't explain. She confronted them with trembling lips, asking where they got the money. They lied. She knew they lied. But her heart, heavy as it was, still held on to love, and she chose to pray instead of punish. It got worse. One evening, a shop owner dragged Samto home by the collar, accusing him of stealing a power bank. Chitty tried to fight the man off, shouting threats. Mama Uju fell to her knees in front of the man, tears pouring from her eyes, like rain on dry ground. "Please, I beg you. I will pay," she wept, her voice cracking. The man spat on the ground and walked away, warning them never to return to his shop. That night, Mama Uju sat outside the house for hours, unable to speak. The stars blinked above, but her world was dark. Her body ached from stress, and her soul was worn thin. Yet even then, when her sons knelt before her crying fake tears, she forgave them. "Just be better. That's all I ask," she whispered. And for a few days they would behave, until the cycle repeated, and each time a piece of her spirit was chipped away. One morning, a letter arrived from the police station. Chitty had been arrested for pickpocketing in the market. Mama Uju rushed there barefoot, heart pounding. By the time she reached, her son was in tears behind the bars, with bruises on his face and shame in his eyes. The officers demanded bail money. "Nigeria Naira 500,000, one of them barked. That amount was a mountain for her. She hadn't held more than 5,000 Nigerian Nairas in months. She begged, cried, even offered her earrings. When they wouldn't bulge, she did the unthinkable. She walked back to the village chief's palace and requested permission to sell the one land her late husband had left behind, a small, fertile piece in Umea's, where he once dreamed of building a better house. That land was her future, her security. But now, her son's freedom was the price. She sold it for less than its worth to a greedy buyer and used the money to free Chitty and clear other debts. The neighbors warned her. "Uju, these boys will finish you," they said. "Leave them to learn their lesson." But how could a mother watch her own flesh rot behind bars? "God will touch them one day," she replied, even as her hands trembled from writing the transfer papers. With what was left from the land sale, she enrolled both boys into a private secondary school on the other side of town. If they can just change their environment, she reasoned, maybe things will get better. She paid up front for a term and bought new uniforms. That night, she sat at the edge of their shared mattress, telling them how the land they sold had been planted with love and sweat, and she hoped they wouldn't waste the sacrifice. Chitty nodded. Santo looked away. But in her heart, she believed this was the turning point. To sustain them through the new school term, Mama Uju started washing clothes for families and selling gari in cups after frying akara in the morning. Her hands blistered, and her cough grew worse, but she pushed on. Every time she felt like collapsing, she would remember her late husband's words, "Uju, these boys will be great men. You'll see." That hope became her fuel. She would wait at the junction for them to return from school, asking how their day went, packing their bags, and sneaking in the occasional roasted groundnut. They grew taller, stronger. But emotionally, they began to drift. The new school exposed them to more dangerous influences, richer boys, fast girls, and easy money. Mama Uju didn't know it yet, but the more she gave, the more entitled they became. The land was gone. Her strength was waning. But her hope? It was still alive, barely flickering, but alive. The harmattan wind blew harder that year, sending chills through the thin cracks of Mama Uju's house. Her cough had worsened, turning from a dry tickle to a deep, chest-rattling ache that shook her bones every morning before dawn. She would wrap a scarf tightly around her neck, drink a little hot water mixed with ginger and salt, her only affordable remedy, and still drag herself out before 5 a.m. to set up her akara stand. Her fingers, once slender and soft, had become calloused and cracked. Yet every time she looked at the school uniforms hanging on the wall, or heard the sound of Chitty and Santo snoring in the next room, her spirit pushed forward. She lived for them. Even when her knees buckled under the weight of exhaustion and the world around her grew blurry, she told herself that love must endure. She did not care that her body was deteriorating. What mattered was that her sons would have a future. That was all she had left, all she prayed for. One night, the rain came like a warning. Thunder roared like anger from heaven, and wind tore through the village like a thief. Mama Uju's leaking roof gave way, and water poured directly into the middle of her room. She sprang from her sleeping mat, coughing violently, as she tried to shield her sons from the cold. Samto groaned, turning his back to her, while Chitty covered his ears and mumbled something about being tired. She stood in the middle of the room, shivering, trying to push a wooden bench under the part of the roof that hadn't collapsed. Then, without warning, her legs gave out. She fell to the floor with a hard thud. The sound didn't stir her sons. They were used to the chaos. She lay there for several minutes, coughing into her palm until it was slick with blood. She stared at it in the dim lantern light, alarmed, not for herself, but for the time she might not have left. Still, she didn't cry. She stood, wiped her hand on her wrapper, and whispered, "I must not die yet. Who will help my children?" By morning, the boys grumbled about the wet floor and asked why she hadn't fixed the roof already. "You know sabi prepare?" Samto hissed. "This house be like nonsense," Chitty added, stepping around her to grab his school bag. Mama Uju forced a smile. She reached for a wooden stool, winced slightly, and handed them their breakfasts, leftover yam and watery palm oil sauce. "Pray before you eat," she reminded them gently. But neither of them did. They ate and left in haste, their footsteps fading down the muddy path. Alone, she finally sat down, cradling her chest as the pain throbbed stronger. Her cough returned with vengeance, and again, blood stained her palm. She stared at it like it was the end of a sentence. She thought of visiting the health center, but who would watch the Acra stand? Who would pay for the medicine? And who would buy food for her boys? So she took a deep breath, tied her headscarf again, and limped out into the cold morning, determined, or maybe desperate, to stay alive long enough to see them change. It had been 3 months since her cough worsened, and the small cough syrup she bought on credit had finished without relief. Mama Uju's strength waned by the day, but the boys had other concerns. Chitty, now nearly 20, came home one day with sparkling eyes and a grand idea. "Mama, there's this printing and recharge card business we can enter with my guy," he said, stretching out a crumpled paper with figures and projections written on it. "He just needs 250,000 naira to add to what he already has. I trust this one." Samto joined him. "Mama, ego blowo. If we enter this thing, now, we go carry you comet this poverty. You deserve better." She blinked. They had never spoken so gently in months. Her heart softened. She listened, not because she believed in the business, but because she desperately wanted to believe in them again. She wanted to believe they were finally thinking about the future, about her. The old dream stirred again. A house with real windows, a store where she sold provisions, and sons who made her proud. "But where do I get such money?" she asked them. They glanced at each other, then pointed to the unused patch of land behind the compound, the one remaining inheritance from her husband. "Mama, you still get that land now," Chitty said. "It's just wasting. Let us use it to raise this money. We go make it back and buy 10 lands for you." The idea cut through her heart like a knife. That land was supposed to be sacred, the only thing left of Nanso's legacy. They had already used the first plot for bail and school. This was the last. But the way they looked at her, with hope and ambition in their voices, moved her. She wanted them to succeed, even if it meant stripping herself completely of any backup plan. After days of hesitation, prayers, and tears, she sold the land to a local businessman for far less than it was worth. With trembling hands, she handed her sons the cash, warning them softly, "Don't forget what this means. This is everything I have." For the first few weeks, there was excitement. They bought supplies, made business cards, and even printed flyers. Chitty brought home noodles and drinks to share, and Samto took selfies with posters that read "Coming soon," swift cards in print. Mama Uju's heart danced, and she dared to believe the worst was finally over. But by the second month, the updates slowed. The phone calls were shorter. Then the excuses began. The business partner had disappeared. The machine broke down. NEPA issues. Chitty blamed Samto. Samto blamed Chitty. They blamed the economy. But no one took responsibility. When Mama Uju finally asked what remained of the money, Chitty shouted, "Are you blaming me now?" Samto walked out. The dream died a slow death, one that left no body, just silence. Mama Uju sat outside that night, hands trembling, eyes glazed. She didn't weep. She had no tears left. Just a bruised heart and an empty backyard where her husband's dream once lived. Mama Uju was still reeling from the collapse of the boy's business when a bigger disgrace struck. One Tuesday morning, as she was returning from buying beans for Accra, a neighbor stopped her with a worried look. "Uju, go to school quicko. They say they catch Santo." Her heart skipped. She rushed there, barefoot and sweating, only to find her son being held by the school authorities, caught with a leaked exam paper and accused of leading a cheating ring. The principal, furious and embarrassed, threatened to expel him. "This is not the first time he's been a problem," he said coldly. "Your son is a bad influence." Mama Uju, weak from illness and stress, knelt in the office, pleading until her voice cracked. She promised to pay for damages, begged for one last chance, and even borrowed 15,000 Nigerian nairas from a woman she once helped during childbirth to settle the issue. She signed documents with shaking hands, her face burning with shame as she walked her son home silently, holding back tears like a dam on the edge of breaking. But the storm didn't end there. Just 2 weeks later, Santo disappeared for a whole day. Mama Uju searched frantically, visiting friends, asking villagers, even checking the local viewing centers. When he returned, it was nearly midnight, reeking of alcohol and sweat. She slapped him, something she had not done in years. "Where did you go?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the compound. Santo staggered and laughed. "I'm a man, Mama. You can't control me forever." Then came the worst news. He had been caught at a motel earlier that day with 2 underage girls. The matter was quickly suppressed, thanks to the motel owner's connection with the village chief. But the shame was now public. Neighbors whispered behind her back. Women pulled their daughters away when they saw her boys coming, and people stopped buying Accra from her stand. "Nah, so damn spoiled Pekin," they said. "She too pamper them. Look at them now, disgraceful." Mama Uju felt as though she was walking through fire every day, but still, she showed up at her stand. She coughed into her wrapper, wiped her sweat, and sold her Accra as though her world wasn't collapsing. In the evenings, she would sit in the dark and stare at the ceiling, praying for strength, asking where she had gone wrong. Her savings were gone, her land was gone, and her health was fading. But most of all, her sons were slipping further away, into a world of lies, recklessness, and ruin. And yet, when they came home drunk, she still laid their heads on her lap and whispered, "God, please, don't let my sons die before they live." She did not know how much longer she could carry them, but her love, wounded, tired, and unappreciated, refused to die. Not yet. Mama Uju sat outside her compound one humid evening, watching the sun fall behind the distant hills, her hands trembling over a worn ledger. She had nothing left to sell. No land, no valuables, and no savings. The debts she owed for Santo's scandal and Chitty's failed business haunted her like shadows. Her Accra business, once her lifeline, had slowed to a crawl. People no longer gathered at her stand the way they used to. Her son's growing reputation had stained her efforts, and whispers of the mother of useless boys echoed behind her every step. But instead of giving up, Mama Uju made a decision to try again. She had overheard someone in the market talk about buying foodstuff in bulk and selling them in smaller quantities at a profit. It wasn't grand, but it was honest. She didn't need mansion. She just needed something that would keep the roof above her head and allow her to feed herself. That night, she sold the gold-plated earring she wore on her wedding day, the only jewelry she had left, and raised just enough to buy 1 sack of Gary. With that sack and a second-hand basin, she began her new venture. Each morning, before the first cock crowed, she would drag her sore feet to the roadside, measure Gary into cups, and hawk them with a shaky but determined voice. After the Gary, she swept compounds for other families, washed clothes for newlyweds, and even fetched water for old women who pitted her state. She worked like someone possessed, ignoring the cough that now came with blood and body aches that never eased. Her fingers bled from scrubbing concrete floors, but she smiled every time she counted her meager earnings. To her, this was dignity, the only kind she had left. She didn't wait for help from her sons anymore. In fact, they barely came home. Chitty, who now lived in the city, rarely called. Samto often slept at friends' houses, returning only when he was broke or needed food. They saw her struggle, but offered no hand. Once, when she asked Samto to help her carry Gary sacks from the junction, he hissed and said, "Mama, must you always embarrass yourself?" Still, she prayed for them. She never stopped. In the silence of the night, with her cracked knees pressed to the cold floor, she would cry into her Bible and plead with God to touch their hearts. She asked not for riches, not for healing, just for her boys to come back to their senses before her strength ran out. One afternoon, she approached them with a soft voice and a simple idea. "Let's start a small provision shop. I have a little saved. We can do it together." Chitty laughed without looking up from his phone. Samto shrugged and muttered, "We no day do petty things again." That night, she couldn't sleep. Not because of hunger, she was used to that, but because of the gnawing realization that her children no longer saw her, no longer valued her sacrifices. Yet she held on, not because there was reason to hope, but because letting go would mean surrendering to a heartbreak she wasn't ready to accept. It happened so suddenly, like rain falling on dry land. After years of wandering, gambling, and chasing empty dreams, fortune finally smiled on her sons, but not through her. Chitty got a job at a tech startup in Lagos, thanks to an old classmate who needed someone with street smarts to run logistics. He earned well, dressed sharply, and started sending filtered photos back to the village. Meanwhile, Samto stumbled into politics by chance, running errands for a local campaign manager, and eventually being handed a small contract. It went through, and the money came. Fast. Within months, he was renting an apartment in town, wearing designer clothes, and driving a second-hand Benz. The boys had made it. The very same village that once mocked Mama Uju now whispered differently. "Those her boys' day do well now, oh," they said. Some came to greet her, hoping to tap into her children's new status. But Mama Uju was cautious. She didn't celebrate. She waited. She had seen dreams rise and collapse like a sandcastle in a storm. Still, she smiled and prayed that maybe, just maybe, her years of suffering were over. For a short while, there was hope. Chitty called once and said, "Mama, just hold on. We go change your life soon." Samto sent her 10,000 Nigerian nairas out of the blue. It was the first money she had received from him in years. She used it to patch her leaking roof and buy medication for her cough. She told the local pastor to help her write a thank you letter to both sons, her handwriting too shaky now from age and fatigue. But as weeks turned into months, the call stopped. The money stopped. And the promises faded like forgotten lyrics. When she called Chitty, his phone rang unanswered. When she reached Samto, he would say, "I day meeting, Mama. I go call you back." But the call never came. She asked a neighbor's son to help her open Instagram. What she saw broke her. Chitty was in Ghana, posing beside a swimming pool with girls in bikinis. Samto had just hosted a party in Enugu, complete with red carpet and champagne. The captions read, "From trenches to treasures." There was no mention of her. Mama Uju sat on her bamboo chair that night, her handkerchief soaked with tears, her chest tight with a pain she couldn't name. She was proud, yes, but also invisible. The success she had prayed for had come, but not with the love she hoped it would carry. They didn't come to visit. They didn't ask how she was coping. Her eyes were dimmer now, her cough more frequent, and her joints stiffer. She longed not for their wealth, but for their presence. To sit and eat with them again, to hear them laugh genuinely at her jokes. But they had risen without her. She was no longer part of their story. They had found their footing, but forgotten the ground that bore them. Yet still, she whispered their names in prayer, believing that even if they forgot her, heaven would not. It was during the height of the rainy season when Mama Uju's roof began to collapse again, this time not with small leaks, but with full planks falling from the ceiling. She had saved up 18,000 Nigerian nairas and hoped to buy wood and zinc to make emergency repairs. But she needed help. Not money, just someone to transport the materials. She called Chitty one afternoon, her voice weak, but filled with practiced hope. "My son, the roof is falling again. If you can just send 10,000 Nigerian nairas or help find someone to bring it, I will manage the rest." There was a pause on the line. Then Chitty sighed and said, "Mama, I'm in Abuja now. I'm busy. I'll send something when I can." The line went dead. She waited for days. Nothing came. Samto was next. She called and explained the same thing. He responded, "Mama, you day make everything sound urgent. Just patch it." She tried to explain that she was sick, that water was now dripping on her sleeping mat. But he ended the call abruptly and didn't pick up again. That week, a strong storm came. Wind tore through the village like an angry spirit. The roof gave in completely, and water poured into her home. Her clothes were soaked. Her Bible was wet. She sat in a corner, wrapped in a faded blanket, coughing blood into a basin as rain fell beside her like a curse. She sent both boys voice notes that night, trembling, wheezing, trying to be strong. "I don't want to disturb you," she whispered into the speaker, "but if anything happens to me, know that I tried for you. I just wanted you to succeed." Chitty read the message, but didn't reply. Samto deleted it. She moved in with a neighbor temporarily, an old widow who offered her a mat by the fire. The neighbor shook her head in pity. "Uju, this is not how it was supposed to end," she said. Mama Uju only smiled and replied, "It hasn't ended yet. They'll still remember me." But deep inside, something had shifted. The pride her sons carried, the air of importance they now wore like perfume, had robbed them of compassion. They had forgotten the woman who once sold her last piece of jewelry for them, the woman who went without food so they could eat, who walked barefoot to free them from police custody. They now saw her calls as a burden, her needs as nagging, and her love, once their strongest shield, had become a forgotten shadow. Yet she kept loving them. She still told people, "My boys are doing well. They'll come home soon." She still bragged about their success, though they sent nothing. Even in their neglect, she found a way to protect them, from shame, from judgment, and from the truth. But the price of that pride, their refusal to acknowledge her sacrifices, was growing steeper. And soon, fate would make them pay, not in money, but in a way no riches could ever fix. The day of Samto's birthday party arrived like a slap across Mama Uju's already worn face. She hadn't heard from him in over 2 months, and her calls had gone unanswered for weeks. But a neighbor's teenage daughter showed her photos on Facebook, glimmering snapshots of a party thrown in Enugu that looked like something out of a celebrity magazine. The caption read, "Big Samto level up, from nothing to #1. He stood with women hanging on his arms, bottles of champagne at his feet, dressed in designer wear and sunglasses indoors." In one video clip, he was spraying 100 naira notes on a woman twerking in the middle of the room while his friends cheered. The video hurt her deeply, not just because she was absent, but because he had celebrated his survival like she was never part of it. In all the captions, all the laughter, there was no mention of the woman who raised him from scratch with bleeding hands and blistered feet. Mama Uju sat under her mango tree that evening, the party pictures still fresh in her mind. She hadn't eaten since morning, not because there wasn't a little gari and soup left, but because something inside her had collapsed. She clutched her wrapper, stared blankly at the evening sky, and asked herself if she had failed. Not as a businesswoman, not as a neighbor, but as a mother. Was love not enough? Was endurance now weakness? She remembered how years ago she spent her last money buying Samto his first birthday cake, a small one with white icing and "Happy Birthday Sami" written shakily on it by a roadside baker. He had hugged her then, giggling, his face covered in icing. Now years later he was surrounded by friends, music, and women, yet there was no place for her. The same boy who once cried when she scraped his knees now turned his face when she called. It wasn't the absence that stung the most, it was the knowing that he was actively avoiding her. Despite it all, she smiled when asked about it the next day. A woman from her church, unaware of her pain, came and said, "Mama Samto, I see your son is now a big boy. Oh, that party sweet." Mama Uju chuckled softly and replied, "Yes, oh, he's doing well. May God keep lifting him." But when the woman left, Mama Uju turned her face and wept. Her body leaned against the kitchen wall, and for the first time, Her knees gave way not from sickness, but from sorrow. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing silently. She felt forgotten, erased. Not because her sons didn't send her money, but because they no longer saw her. In their world of flashing lights and noisy victories, she was just background, a faded picture in a broken frame. And yet, through the tears, she whispered, "God, I don't need them to praise me. Just bring them back before it's too late." It happened just as the sky turned black with the first storm of the season. Mama Uju had managed to patch part of her roof with old zinc sheets donated by a kind neighbor, but most of it was still bare. She was boiling water for her bath when the first droplet landed inside her kitchen, sizzling as it hit the firewood. Within minutes, the rain intensified. Thunder cracked loudly as if heaven itself had grown angry. The wind picked up violently, howling through the broken windows, and before she could grab her basin to collect the water, the entire left side of her roof gave in. A large plank fell to the floor, smashing a cooking pot. Water flooded in like a river released. Her mattress soaked instantly. Her few clothes, which hung on a rope across the room, dropped into the muddy water forming on the ground. Mama Uju stood in the center of it all, shivering and coughing, helpless in the storm that didn't just destroy her house, it humiliated her. Desperate and shaking, she reached for her phone and tried calling Chitty first. The phone rang once, then went straight to voicemail. She tried again, and again. No answer. With trembling fingers, she sent a voice note. "My son, it's raining heavily. The roof has fallen. I don't have where to sleep. I'm scared, Chitty. Please, just call me." She waited a few minutes, then tried Samto. This time, he picked but sounded irritated. "Mama, I day meeting. You always call at the wrong time. Try to manage." She tried to explain, her voice breaking with tears. "My house is falling, Samto. The water is everywhere." But the line cut off. He had ended the call. Mama Uju stared at her phone like it had slapped her. She wrapped her only dry wrapper around her soaked nightgown and stepped out into the rain, limping to her neighbor's house. The woman, shocked to see her drenched and coughing, ushered her in quickly. "Mama Chitty, what happened?" she asked. Mama Uju, lips pale and body shivering, just whispered, "They said I should manage." That night, as she lay on a spare mat beside the neighbor's fire, coughing into a wet cloth, she stared at the wooden ceiling and replayed the words in her head. Try to manage. Her entire life had been one long episode of managing pain, managing hunger, managing broken dreams. She remembered how she once walked barefoot to Chitty's school because she didn't have money for transport. She remembered how she once gave Samto the only piece of meat in a pot and told him she'd already eaten. Now, in the moment she needed them most, she was too small for their attention. A burden, an inconvenience. Her eyes burned with tears that wouldn't fall, perhaps because even her tears were tired. The next morning, she put on her wet slippers, gathered what few clothes she had left, and returned to the shell of her broken house. It smelled of rain and betrayal. But still, she swept the floor and whispered, "They will still come. Even if it's when I'm gone, they will come." By the time the rain stopped and the sun returned, Mama Uju's health had deteriorated so visibly that even the market women began asking if she had seen a doctor. Her cough came in violent bursts, sometimes leaving her breathless and bent over. Her weight had dropped drastically, her cheeks now hollow, and her eyes carried a permanent redness from sleepless nights. But through all this, one dream still burned quietly within her, the dream of owning a small provision store. Not a fancy supermarket, just a humble corner shop with biscuits, sachet milk, rice, soap, the basics. Something that would allow her to stop frying akara on the roadside and sit peacefully, attending to customers without coughing in the smoke. Something that would give her dignity. And most of all, something she could hand over to her sons one day, in case their big dreams ever failed. She believed that a steady shop could teach them responsibility. So she began saving again, 200 Nigerian nairas here, 500 Nigerian nairas there. Every naira was a seed of hope. Once she had managed to raise 20,000 Nigerian nairas, she called Chitty, her voice warm but cautious. "My son, I have a small idea. I want to start a provision store." I have saved some money, but I need just 30,000 Nigerian nairas more to rent the shop and buy goods." There was silence on the other end. Then Chitty said, "Mama, store business is too small now. Let's wait, I go invest something big for you later." She smiled faintly, even though her heart sank. "But Chitty, it's what I can manage. I don't need big." He told her he would think about it, and ended the call. She waited for a week. Nothing came. Then she tried Samto. He picked after the third attempt and said, "Mama, rest. You don't need to do business again. Just rest. I fit send you something when I settle small." She was about to respond when she heard music and laughter in the background. "Where are you?" she asked gently. "Ibiza," he replied before hanging up. Ibiza. Abroad. While she sat in a house with a half roof and borrowed food, her son was partying in a foreign land. That night, she stared at her small money box, all her savings, and felt a sharp pain in her chest. Not from sickness, but from disappointment. She had raised them with so much fire in her bones, sacrificed more than most women ever would, and all she wanted in return was a small shop. A shop to call her own. A place where she could sit and breathe and stop depending on people. But even that, they made her feel foolish for wanting. She put the money box under her pillow and prayed for strength. Not for more life. She was beginning to feel her time slipping. But for one final opportunity to hold her sons and make them remember. She didn't want to die invisible. She didn't want to be buried under a tin roof and have people say she tried, but her children abandoned her. She wanted to leave something behind, even if it was just a shop made of rusted zinc and love. In the chaos of wealth poorly earned, Chitty began to believe that money erased the past. After months of running logistics for the tech startup, he received an unexpected opportunity. A crypto-based payment company looking for Nigerian representatives. Eager to impress and finally outshine his former classmates, he poured everything into the new venture. He rented a small office, paid for branding, and even employed 2 boys from the village. Without research, without caution, Chitty invested millions into a coin he knew nothing about, spurred by flashy telegram groups and promises of quick profit. Meanwhile, he began living like the Lagos elite, popping champagne in Lekki lounges, clubbing every weekend, and switching women like outfits. He bought designer watches and took selfies in front of rented cars. His Instagram page swelled with likes and praise. No one asked how he got there. And the moment he started believing his own hype, he lost the little sense of grounding he had left. Samto's political luck ran a similar course. He was handed a small government contract by a local commissioner who used him as a front to launder money. The first payment came in, and with that, his ego bloated. He paid rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in town, bought new phones, and started an online talk show where he discussed growth and hustle. At the same time, he was sponsoring women's trips to Dubai, renting hotel suites for days, and hosting parties that mimicked the very elites he once resented. But behind the scenes, he was borrowing heavily to maintain his image. He took loans from friends, borrowed against fake invoices, and even sold the only land his late father had in another village, the same land Mama Uju once refused to touch. He didn't inform her. He didn't need her permission anymore, he thought. She had become a ghost in the story he now told the world, a story that started with struggle, but conveniently excluded the woman who sold everything to keep him alive. But as quickly as the money came, it began to disappear. Chitty's crypto investment crashed during a market dip, wiping out his funds. The partners vanished. His office was sealed by the landlord due to unpaid rent. Samto's commissioner was arrested in a scandal that made national headlines, and all his unpaid vendors began to hunt him down. Creditors came knocking, and their phones, once ringing with admiration, now buzzed with threats. Chitty tried to sell some of his designer watches, but realized they were fake. Samto begged one of the girls he had once sponsored to lend him 200,000 Nigerian nairas. She laughed in his face. Their friends disappeared like mist in sunlight. They tried calling each other, blaming one another, making excuses. But neither of them thought to call Mama Uju. Even in the chaos, she remained forgotten. Her sickness worsened. Her coughs deepened. But still, she whispered their names in prayer, not knowing the very fire that fueled their rise was now consuming the thrones they built on lies. The fall came fast and merciless. Within weeks, Chitty's apartment was locked up, and his personal items thrown out into the corridor. His calls to former friends were met with, "I'll get back to you," or worse, silence. He slept at a roadside guest house for 2 nights before moving in with a friend who gave him only 1 week. His clothes, once ironed and hung in color-coded closets, now fit into a single nylon bag. His phone line, cut off for failure to recharge. His once vibrant Instagram account now a ghost town. No new pictures, no admiration. He remembered Mama Uju once begging him to save, to avoid flashy living, to build slowly. He had laughed then. "Mama, this generation no day do slow." But now, he sat in darkness, staring at a cracked phone screen, his pride the only thing louder than his stomach. Still, he did not call her. He couldn't. He didn't know how to face her, the woman he had ignored while spraying money on strangers. Santo's collapse was even more dramatic. He was publicly embarrassed at a hotel where he tried to use a bounce check. The video circulated briefly online. "Local Yahoo boy exposed," one caption read. His landlord kicked him out. His political friends deleted his number. A creditor seized his only working laptop. He moved back to a friend's compound in Enugu outskirts, where he shared a small room with 2 other men. One day, as he sat eating EBA without soup, he found himself remembering the first time Mama Uju gave him meat as a child, saving it while eating bones herself. A hot shame spread through him. He remembered how he once hissed at her for asking for money to fix a broken window. He had said then, "You 2-day disturbed person." But now, there was no one to disturb, no one to help, no money, no friends, just silence and humiliation. He opened his gallery and scrolled through old pictures, birthday cakes, champagne, women. None of it felt real anymore. It was during one of those silent evenings, both brothers on opposite ends of despair, that they remembered their mother. Not because of guilt at first, but because they needed somewhere to run. Chitty, now desperate and penniless, told himself, "Let me just go and stay with Mama for a while till I balance." Santo thought the same. "She go forgive me," he reasoned. "Not Mama. She no get choice." They didn't talk to each other, didn't coordinate, but they both began planning their return to the village. Chitty packed his few things. Santo borrowed money for transport. And on the same day, by sheer coincidence, 2 broken sons arrived back in Yumyuz, one from the north, the other from the east, dust clinging to their trousers, shame sinking into their skin. They stood before the gate of the old house, each thinking the same thought. Surely, Mama will take us back. But what they found waiting wasn't her open arms. It was something colder than regret, silence. The compound was eerily quiet. The mango tree had withered at the edges, and the front yard was unkempt, wild grass brushing against their feet. The windows were shut. The door was locked. Chitty knocked once, then twice. No answer. "Maybe she went to the market," Santo muttered, trying to mask the unease creeping up his spine. But when a neighbor, an old man with a walking stick, came to the gate and saw them, his face turned solemn. "Chitty, Santo, so you people finally remembered this place," he said, more like a statement than a greeting. "Where's Mama?" Chitty asked, his voice cracking. The old man looked at them for a long time, then removed his cap. "She died 3 weeks ago. Collapsed at the market. She was sick for a long time. We told her to go to the hospital, but she said she had children who would come." The words hit them like bullets. Chitty's hands trembled. Santo staggered back. "Dead." Santo whispered, No, you're lying. Mama can't die like that. Not without telling us." The neighbor sighed deeply and pointed toward the backyard. "She's buried there. It was we, the villagers, who raised money to give her something small. She didn't want to be buried in shame." They ran to the back of the compound. There it was, a small, lonely grave covered with gravel, a crude wooden cross planted in the soil. On it was scratched, Mama Uju, a strong woman. Chitty collapsed beside it, sobbing uncontrollably. Santo tore his shirt and screamed, "No, Mama." I came back. I came back. But the earth didn't answer. She was gone. The woman who gave everything, who suffered silently, who prayed till her last breath for their return, was gone. They had come home, yes. But too late. Too late to say sorry. Too late to kneel. Too late to hold her frail hands one more time. The grave held her now, not a hug. And it held the truth they had spent years running from. They had broken her. And now, she could no longer forgive them in person. That night, the village was quiet. Word spread quickly. Mama Ujja's boys are back, but only after her death. Some pitied them. Most didn't. The pain of watching her suffer was still fresh for many. Chitty and Samto sat by the grave until morning, their once proud shoulders slumped, their bodies shivering despite the heat. They read the last text she had sent, voice notes filled with trembling hope and silence. Chitty clutched a faded wrapper they found on her bed. Samto picked up a torn Bible with her name scribbled inside. No inheritance. No house. No welcome. Only memory. Only guilt. They had finally returned to their mother, but her arms were no longer waiting. Just soil. Just silence. Just sorrow. The house was still. So still, it felt like even the walls had stopped breathing. Chitty and Samto sat silently in the same room where they once ran around half-naked as boys, giggling while their mother stirred soup on the fire. But now, the scent of old dust and regret hung in the air. Her sleeping mat lay untouched. A rusted pot still sat on the wooden shelf, with cobwebs clinging to its rim. Samto bent and picked up her pillow, intending to shake the dust off, but something hard thudded to the ground. A small, faded exercise book, brown with age, its pages curled and stained with time. Chitty recognized the handwriting even before opening it. That curved, careful script, it was hers. Their mother's. They sat cross-legged on the floor, like children again, and began to read the pages one by one. But what they found wasn't just a diary. It was a confession, a collection of silent heartbreaks, prayers, and letters never sent. It held her pain, recorded in ink, every line dripping with love and suffering. The first few pages were hopeful, her dreams about how Chitty would be a lawyer, how Samto might travel abroad one day. Even though I am coughing badly now, I will not give up, one entry read. God will touch their hearts. I know they will change. I just need to live long enough to see it. Another page was a letter addressed to Chitty on his 25th birthday. My dear son, I know I may not be in your world anymore, but I am proud of you. Just remember, no matter how high you fly, never forget the wings that lifted you. The letters were never sent. The birthday cards were never given. They found poems she wrote in broken English, business ideas she had written and rewritten, trying to find the right pitch to impress her sons. If we start small shop with pure water and sweets, she wrote in one note, maybe they will help me grow it. Maybe they will come sit with me sometimes. There were pages where she cried through her words, smudges where tears had fallen, dark circles around the words, I miss them. By the time they reached the last page, neither of the brothers could breathe normally. Their eyes were bloodshot, their hands shaking. The final entry was dated just 2 days before her death. It read, I don't think I will make it this week. My chest is heavy. But if I go, I pray God sends peace to my sons. Even if they didn't come, I know they love me deep down. Maybe life just made them forget. I forgive them. Always. That sentence shattered them. Samto dropped the book and held his head in his hands. Chitty let out a low, guttural sob and leaned against the wall. For years, they had walked around with pride, wearing success like armor. But now, stripped to the core, they realized that nothing, not money, not cars, not praise, could buy back what they had lost. Not the land, not the forgiveness, not the time. The woman they had ignored had spent her final moments praying for their peace. And they had never even said thank you. The next morning, dark clouds gathered above the village like a divine mourning cloth spread across the sky. Chitty and Samto walked to her grave again, this time barefoot. They didn't say a word to each other. The silence between them was not of anger, but of mutual grief, the kind that didn't need to be spoken. The grave was modest, covered in gray sand and a few weeds that had already started to grow along the edges. Someone had placed a small lantern beside the cross, perhaps a neighbor who remembered her light. As they knelt before the grave, the first drops of rain began to fall. The air was still. Then Chitty spoke, barely above a whisper. "Mama, I failed you." Samto choked back tears. "I'm sorry," he muttered again and again, as though repeating it would change the finality of what they had done. But the rain didn't stop. It fell harder, baptizing them in guilt and regret, soaking their clothes, but washing nothing away. Villagers stood afar, watching them. Some shook their heads in disapproval. Others turned away. One woman muttered, "They let that woman die alone, and now they're crying?" But Mamankechi, her closest neighbor, walked up quietly with a black umbrella. She didn't offer it to them. Instead, she placed it gently beside the grave, leaned forward, and whispered. She prayed for this day. Every morning, she prayed you come back. Too late, but she'd still smile. Then she turned and walked away. The brothers remained. The mud clung to their knees. The rain soaked their hair, plastered their shirts to their skin. But they didn't care. They stayed there for hours, speaking, crying, praying, begging, as if the soil might shift and return her, as if the sound of their voices might stir her from beneath. "We'll build you something beautiful," Chitty said. "We'll put your name on it. You'll never be forgotten," Samto added. But the grave remained quiet. No wind, no voice, just the steady sound of rain falling on broken men. Eventually, they stood up, soaked and shaking, and walked back to the house. The village path looked different now, not because it had changed, but because they finally saw it through her eyes. The long road she walked to fetch water, the firewood path she used when she had no kerosene, the little stall by the corner where she once sold akara under the scorching sun. Everything they had overlooked, everything they had mocked as poverty, now stood like monuments of her strength. As they entered the compound, they noticed that some children had begun playing near the mango tree. One of them pointed at them and whispered, "Those are Mama Uju's sons." The label that once brought shame now pierced like a dagger. They were her sons, and they had only returned in time for her absence. The rain continued. Inside the house, the diary still sat open on the mat, as if Mama Uju's spirit had one last thing to say. "I waited, but you came too late." After burying their mother, the brothers returned to the city, but nothing felt the same. Chitty stepped into the apartment he once rented in Lekki, now locked and covered in dust. The landlord had seized his belongings for unpaid rent. His friends, the ones who used to toast drinks in his name, had moved on. They didn't return his calls. He wandered the streets of Lagos for days, trying to find work. His certificate was incomplete, his reputation tainted. In every interview, he was turned down, some too polite to say he was overqualified, others whispering about his past. The city that once adored him now ignored him. No parties, no clubs, just hunger, silence, and loneliness. He eventually got a job as a driver for a delivery company, the same kind of work he once mocked as hustling for small boys. Each time he put his hands on the wheel, he remembered Mama Uju's cracked palms and how she carried the family with nothing but willpower and love. The guilt pressed against his chest like 1,000 bricks. Samto's fall was worse. With debts piling and creditors hounding him, he tried to re-enter politics, but found all doors closed. The scandal had destroyed any credibility he once had. Desperate, he returned to the friends he had lavished money on, the same women he flew abroad. None helped. They laughed or blocked him. One even accused him of trying to use her. He ended up squatting in a single room with 3 strangers, waking each morning to stare at a rusted ceiling fan that barely worked. One day, as he sat outside the compound with his head in his hands, an old beggar came by and said, "Young man, if you have anything to spare." Samto looked up, and for a moment, he saw his mother's eyes, tired, kind, hopeful. He had nothing to give, but he whispered, "I'm sorry," to no one in particular. That night, he cried himself to sleep, not because he was broke, but because he now understood. Everything they thought was beneath them, her advice, her sacrifices, her love, had been worth more than any money they ever held. In the silence of their new lives, they both began to change. Not publicly, not for applause, but slowly, deeply. Chitty stopped lying to himself. He started saving, stopped chasing attention. Samto found work as a clerk for a small firm, nothing grand, but honest. They didn't speak much about Mama anymore. But every morning, they opened her Bible and read a verse, just like she used to. They kept her diary. Sometimes, they recited her prayers. Their phones were filled with reminders they created in her honor. Things like call home, send something to the village, pray before sleep. They started again, not as men chasing money, but as sons seeking meaning. But no matter how far they came, no matter how much they tried to rebuild, the silence of her absence echoed louder than any success. They had gained the world, and lost the one heart that loved them unconditionally. And nothing they did now, could fill the empty mansion their pride had left behind. Regret settled into their lives like a tenant that refused to leave. It followed them everywhere, in the quiet moments, in the smell of acra on a roadside, in the sound of a cough that reminded them of her wheezing breath. Chitty tried to move on. He got a promotion at the delivery company and started managing staff. But every salary day made him think of the years he had money and never sent a kobo home. Each time he signed a document, he remembered her hands. Hands that washed floors, cooked without rest, and stretched beyond reason just to pay his school fees. At night, he couldn't sleep. He saw her in his dreams, sometimes smiling, sometimes turning away. He once dreamt she was frying akara in the rain and calling him, but no matter how fast he ran, he never reached her. He would wake up sweating, only to see her diary lying beside his pillow, the very same diary he now read daily, like a Bible of guilt. Samto, on his part, began to unravel in slower, quieter ways. He stopped drinking. He stopped trying to impress anyone. He worked honestly, but depression crept in like a slow fog. He would sit at bus parks and watch mothers feed their children, tears quietly falling from his eyes. He couldn't forgive himself. He once tried to write a letter, addressed to her, pouring out everything he wished he had said when she was alive. I was stupid, Mama. I was blind. You were never poor, we were. You were never weak, we were cowards. I miss you. I miss your voice. I miss your love. And I know I don't deserve to be called your son, but I will carry your name like a cross for the rest of my life. But he never posted it anywhere. Instead, he folded it, tucked it into her Bible, and whispered, maybe somehow you'll read it. His face aged faster. His spirit dimmed. Because some mistakes, especially the kind that bury love, have no remedy. They tried to do good. They gave money to widows. They started helping old women in the community. Once, they tried sponsoring a village health center, thinking it would redeem what they had done. But nothing filled the void. Redemption requires acknowledgement, not just action. And the one heart that needed their change was already beneath the earth. Their names were no longer mentioned with pride, only with quiet judgment. They came too late. That phrase followed them like a shadow. It was true. They had succeeded too late, changed too late, returned too late. Regret had become their companion, their echo, their mirror. It was a room they now lived in, one with no door to escape. Every wall whispered what they should have done. Every silence screamed her name. And no matter how much time passed, that ache never dulled. Because some losses don't fade. They burn slower, like a wound that knows no healing, only remembrance. A year passed, then another. And one afternoon, they returned to Yumuse again, not with noise or grandeur, but with bowed heads and quiet hearts. They had come to do something she once dreamed of, build a small free school by the mango tree she loved. Not to impress anyone, not for redemption, but as a monument of memory, for the woman who gave everything, received nothing, and still loved without holding back. They used their savings, not donations. They named the school Mama Uju Learning Center. There was no ribbon cutting, no politicians, just a priest, 2 chairs, a quiet ceremony, and rain clouds hovering above. As the first signboard went up, an old woman passing by clapped slowly. She goes smile from heaven. That woman suffered too much. The boys didn't smile. They didn't cry. They just stood there in silence, eyes fixed on the name. It wasn't enough. Nothing ever would be. But it was something. A start. A whisper of peace in the storm of their guilt. That evening, the rain returned, a soft drizzle, like tears falling gently from the clouds. Chitty lit a candle and placed it at her grave. The wind tried to blow it out, but he shielded it with his hands. "Please let it stay," he murmured. Samto joined him, kneeling on the other side of the grave. They didn't speak. Words had long failed them. Around them, the mango leaves rustled. Somewhere, a child laughed in the distance. The school bell rang faintly, its chime dancing through the air like a forgotten lullaby. And, in that moment, they both closed their eyes. Not to pray, not to beg, but to remember. Her voice, her laughter, her sacrifices, her pain. The way she always knew they would return. The way she waited, until her body couldn't. The candle flickered, but it stayed lit, against the wind, against the drizzle. A symbol. A mother's love that even death couldn't erase. And, as they stood to leave, Chitty turned back one last time. He whispered, "Thank you, Mama." Samto followed, his voice cracking, "I love you." Then they walked away, not healed, but aware. Aware that true wealth isn't in money, but in the people who love us when we have nothing. Aware that the greatest sin isn't failure, but forgetting the ones who carried us. Mama Uju never wore fine clothes. She never traveled abroad. But she built men with her hands, her back, and her heart. And in the end, she left something no money could buy, a story, a legacy, a name written not in gold, but in sacrifice. And now, beside a candle burning in the rain, her name will never be forgotten again. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.